The courthouse in Willow Creek, a modest town tucked between rolling Pennsylvania hills, had never felt so charged. On ordinary days, its echoing hallways carried the hum of routine hearings, traffic tickets, small claims, the occasional divorce proceeding. But that morning, as the sun cast slanted beams of late October light across the stone steps, something different stirred in the crisp air. Reporters lingered by the entrance, their breath forming faint clouds as they traded guesses about the day's custody hearing scheduled for courtroom 3. Inside, the wooden benches filled earlier than usual, every shuffle of shoes and rustle of paper magnified by the cavernous space. At the plaintiff's table sat Emily Carter, a 28-year-old mother whose slender frame masked the steel beneath. She wore a navy blazer borrowed from her sister, its slightly loose shoulders betraying the late-night rush of preparation. Emily's hands rested on a stack of neatly organized documents, but her fingers tightened and released in a restless rhythm. Her eyes, though rimmed with fatigue, held a focus sharpened by months of sleepless nights and relentless determination. Beside her sat her attorney, Marla Green, a sharp-eyed advocate known in the county for blending compassion with a cross-examination, style that could slice through the thickest defenses. Across the aisle, Jason Hawley entered with a casual confidence that made several heads turn. At 30, he was handsome in a way that photographs loved: clean-cut jawline, perfectly pressed charcoal suit, and a smile that flickered with easy charm. He paused deliberately before taking his seat, scanning the room as though acknowledging an audience. His attorney, a high-priced litigator from Philadelphia, followed close behind, exuding the polished assurance of someone accustomed to winning. Together, they looked less like a worried father and his counsel than like executives arriving at a board meeting. Between them, in the back row of the gallery, sat a figure few initially noticed, a 2-year-old girl with hair the color of morning wheat. Lily Carter Emily and Jason's daughter swung her short legs beneath the wooden bench while a court-appointed caretaker knelt beside her. She clutched a stuffed rabbit, so worn its fur had thinned to patches, rubbing one ear between tiny fingers. Lily's wide hazel eyes moved from the tall windows to the brass fixtures and finally to the strangers who occasionally turned to look at her. To most, her presence seemed a curiosity. Children rarely attended hearings like this. A few spectators exchanged puzzled glances, whispering behind programs. Was it strategy? Necessity? Or merely a scheduling mishap? No one could say for sure. Judge Franklin Marks entered promptly at 9, his black robe flowing behind him like a shadow. Known for his calm demeanor and meticulous adherence to procedure, Marks had presided over everything from complex fraud trials to bitter divorces. Yet even he felt an undercurrent of something unusual as he surveyed the room. His gaze lingered a fraction longer on the small child in the back before settling on the attorneys. "Good morning," he intoned, voice steady but curious. "This court is now in session." The gavel's sharp crack ricocheted through the chamber, drawing every wandering eye to the front. Emily inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the sound. For months she had rehearsed this day, the statements she would give, the evidence she would present, the calm she needed to maintain. Each preparation was a shield against the unpredictable man seated a few feet away. Jason, for his part, leaned back slightly, the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. To the casual observer, he looked like a man confident in the righteousness of his cause, but Emily knew that expression too well. It was the same smile he wore when dismissing her fears late at night, when promising change that never came. The first hour unfolded with the expected formalities. Marla Green opened with a measured statement, outlining Emily's request for sole custody and emphasizing the child's well-being as the paramount concern. She cited documented incidents of Jason's temper late-night arguments overheard by neighbors, abrupt disappearances during Lily's infancy, financial neglect disguised as forgetfulness. Each point landed with quiet precision. Emily kept her gaze forward, resisting the urge to glance at Jason, though she felt his eyes on her like a pressure against her skin. When it was Jason's attorney's turn, the atmosphere shifted. He rose smoothly, buttoning his tailored jacket with a flourish. "Your Honor," he began, voice warm and resonant, "my client is not the villain Miss Carter paints. He is a devoted father, unfairly maligned by exaggerations and misunderstandings." He displayed photographs of Jason reading bedtime stories, pushing Lily on a park swing, smiling at a family picnic. The images, carefully selected, glowed with the soft edges of happiness. Murmurs drifted through the gallery. A young mother behind Emily tilted her head, her expression softening at the sight of the smiling child in her father's arms. Emily's stomach tightened. She recognized those photos moments Jason had insisted on capturing after days of icy silence or sudden disappearances. They were proof of presence, carefully staged to conceal absence. Marla objected to several characterizations, sparking brief exchanges with the judge, but the photographs remained, shining like polished stones in a river of testimony. Through it all, Lily sat quietly in the back, her small body a pocket of calm amid the storm of adult words. Occasionally she shifted on the bench, pressing the rabbit to her cheek or tracing the grain of the wood with a curious finger. When Jason's lawyer raised his voice for emphasis, she flinched almost imperceptibly, eyes flicking toward her mother as if seeking reassurance. The caretaker whispered something soothing, but Lily's gaze lingered on her father longer than before, studying his face with a seriousness far beyond her years. Outside the windows, clouds gathered, muting the late morning light. Inside, tension coiled tighter with each exchange. The judge scribbled notes, occasionally glancing toward the child, who remained the silent center of the case. Though no one expected her to participate, her very presence shifted the dynamics of the room. Lawyers modulated their tones, spectators leaned forward, and even Jason's confident posture seemed to stiffen whenever her eyes met his. As the first recess approached, Judge Marks adjusted his glasses and addressed both parties. "This court recognizes the gravity of today's proceedings," he said evenly. "Our primary concern remains the welfare of the child. We will break for 15 minutes before continuing testimony." The gavel struck again, signaling a temporary pause, but the underlying tension only deepened. Emily exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath for several minutes. She turned slightly, catching sight of Lily across the room. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, the sterile courtroom faded away. It was just mother and daughter, bound by an unspoken promise of protection. Emily offered a small smile, the kind reserved for bedtime and scraped knees. Lily responded by squeezing her rabbit and tilting her head, as though understanding more than anyone imagined. Jason rose from his chair with deliberate calm, smoothing his tie before stepping toward his attorney. He cast a brief glance toward the back row, where Lily now leaned against the caretaker's shoulder. His smile softened into something almost tender, but Emily recognized the flicker beneath a calculation, a silent claim. She felt a familiar chill, the echo of nights when charm preceded chaos. The recess buzzed with quiet speculation. Reporters whispered into their recorders, courthouse regulars exchanged theories, and strangers debated in hushed tones whether the mother or father seemed more credible. Yet one question rippled through nearly every conversation. Why was the child present? Some suspected a legal strategy, others a scheduling mishap. None guessed that the smallest person in the room would soon wield the greatest influence. When the bailiff called everyone back to order, the audience resumed their seats with renewed curiosity. The air seemed heavier, the wooden benches harder, as though the building itself sensed the coming storm. Emily straightened her blazer and steadied her breathing. Jason returned to his seat, exuding an almost theatrical ease. And in the back row, Lily adjusted the rabbit in her arms, eyes bright, watching everything with a quiet intensity. No one could have known that within hours. Those same eyes would pierce through the careful performances of adults and deliver a truth no evidence could rival. The courtroom was prepared for arguments, witnesses, and rulings. What it was not prepared for, what nobody expected, was a toddler's voice cutting through the noise with two simple, unforgettable words. The courthouse clock struck 11, its chimes echoing faintly through the oak-paneled corridors, as Emily Carter returned to her seat. The brief recess had given her only a few minutes to collect herself, but even those small moments of solitude felt precious. She had stepped outside to the marble hallway, breathing in the faint scent of floor polish and old paper, willing her nerves to settle. Now, as she sat again beneath the bright fluorescent lights of courtroom 3, her heart resumed its anxious rhythm, a steady reminder of the stakes that loomed before her. Emily's life had changed long before this hearing, in ways that few in the gallery could imagine. To strangers, she appeared like any young mother, polite, well-dressed, quietly determined to do what was best for her child. But beneath the surface lay years of calculated endurance, late-night tears, and a courage forged in the quietest moments of fear. The woman sitting at the plaintiff's table today was not the same Emily who had once fallen in love with Jason Hawley. She met Jason during her sophomore year of college, when he was a charismatic graduate student studying business administration. He was magnetic, the kind of man who could light up a crowded room simply by entering it. His laughter carried across noisy parties, and his attention, when turned toward Emily, felt like a spotlight of warmth. Friends warned her that Jason was a fast mover, but Emily, then only 19, mistook his intensity for passion. Their first months together were a whirlwind of spontaneous road trips, late-night dinners, and romantic gestures that seemed lifted from a movie script. He brought flowers without reason, wrote handwritten notes, and spoke of a future filled with possibility. The subtle warnings began almost imperceptibly. Jason's compliments were edged with quiet criticisms. "You look beautiful, but maybe wear something less revealing next time." Or, "I love how social you are, though sometimes I wish you stayed in with me more." At first, Emily dismissed them as harmless expressions of care. But over time, the requests became expectations, and the expectations became demands. By the time she discovered she was pregnant with Lily, the once charming man had revealed a side of himself that chilled her, the side that controlled, belittled, and isolated. Emily remembered the night she told Jason she was expecting. He had smiled a wide, dazzling grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's big news," he had said, pulling her into a hug that felt more like a grip. He promised to support her, to build a family together, but beneath the words she sensed calculation, a claim. In the months that followed, his temper surfaced more often, slammed doors after minor disagreements, cold silences that stretched for days, arguments sparked by imagined slights. When Lily was born, Emily clung to the hope that fatherhood might soften him. For fleeting moments, it seemed to. Jason cradled their newborn with a gentleness that almost erased the darkness. Almost. But the charm always returned with a price. Jason would vanish for days, claiming business trips that ended with vague explanations and late-night arrivals. He criticized Emily's parenting, too strict, too lenient, too everything, until she questioned her every decision. Friends drifted away as he subtly undermined her relationships. "They don't really care about you," he would say. "It's just us now." Emily began to doubt herself, measuring her worth through the unpredictable lens of his approval. The breaking point came one winter evening when Lily was barely a year old. A trivial disagreement about grocery shopping escalated into a shouting match. Jason's anger flared without warning. His voice, sharp and cutting, filled the small apartment. Emily clutched Lily to her chest as Jason's words sliced through the air. Though he never laid a hand on them, the threat in his posture, the clenched fists, the narrowing eyes, was enough to shatter the fragile illusion of safety. That night, while Jason slept, Emily packed a single suitcase, gathered Lily's toys, and fled to her sister's house across town. It was the first decision she had made entirely for herself in years. The months that followed were a blur of paperwork, counseling sessions, and cautious rebuilding. Emily secured a restraining order after Jason appeared unannounced at her workplace, pleading one moment and raging the next. She took a job as a dental receptionist, balancing late hours with Lily's childcare, often skipping meals to stretch her paycheck. Her sister Hannah became both confidant and anchor, offering late-night cups of tea and reminders that leaving was an act of strength, not failure. Yet Jason's presence lingered like a shadow. He sent charming emails followed by angry texts when Emily refused to reply. He filed motion after motion for shared custody, each one a new battle in a war she hadn't chosen. Emily responded with meticulous care, documenting every interaction, saving every message, and working with her attorney to protect Lily. Every trip to the courthouse carried the weight of those memories, the fear that a single misstep could place her daughter back within Jason's unpredictable orbit. Now, seated in the courtroom, Emily felt those years pressing against her like invisible walls. Across the aisle, Jason appeared the picture of calm fatherhood. His suit was flawless, his posture relaxed, his smile charming enough to disarm even the most skeptical observer. Only Emily knew how carefully that image had been constructed. Each photograph presented by his attorney Jason, pushing Lily on a swing. Jason reading a bedtime story was a fragment of truth framed to hide the rest. She remembered those outings, the forced smiles, the tense car rides home, the nights when Lily cried long after the camera was put away. Marla Green leaned closer, her whisper breaking Emily's thoughts. "You're doing great," the attorney said softly, sliding a reassuring hand across the table. "Remember, we have the incident reports, the financial records, the messages. Facts speak louder than charm." Emily nodded, her fingers tightening around the small stuffed rabbit she had placed beside her notes. The toy belonged to Lily, a comfort object carried from home to daycare to court. Emily had slipped it into her bag that morning, partly for Lily, partly for herself. The worn fabric grounded her, reminding her of late nights reading bedtime stories, of small victories like Lily's first steps, of the life she was fighting to preserve. Judge Marks cleared his throat, signaling the continuation of testimony. Jason's attorney resumed questioning, his tone smooth but probing. "Ms. Carter," he began, "would you agree that Mr. Hawley has consistently expressed a desire to be involved in his daughter's life?" Emily steadied her breath. "He has expressed a desire," she said carefully, "but his actions have not always matched his words." The lawyer pressed on, attempting to portray her as an overprotective mother bent on alienating a loving father. Emily answered each question with calm precision, her voice steady despite the tightening knot in her chest. She knew the strategy well. Twist her caution into paranoia, her documentation into obsession. But she refused to yield. Each measured response was both defense and declaration, an assertion that she would no longer be silenced. As the cross-examination dragged on, Emily risked a glance toward the back row. Lily sat with her caretaker, small legs swinging, eyes wide and alert. The little girl tilted her head, studying the adults who spoke in tones she couldn't fully understand. Emily offered a faint smile, a silent promise of protection. Lily responded by squeezing her rabbit, a gesture simple yet so profound it nearly brought Emily to tears. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Outside, the town moved through an ordinary day, traffic signals changing, children playing after school, shopkeepers preparing for the evening rush. Inside courtroom 3, Emily's quiet battle unfolded with the gravity of a storm. Every answer she gave, every document presented, was another step toward a future where her daughter could grow without fear. By the time Judge Marks called for a second recess, Emily felt both drained and fortified. She had faced Jason's polished defense without breaking. Yet, as she gathered her papers, a flicker of unease remained. She couldn't shake the feeling that the day's outcome hinged on more than evidence or argument. Something in the room felt unfinished, as if an unseen force waited for the right moment to reveal itself. Emily glanced once more at Lily, whose eyes seemed almost luminous in the fading light. The child's innocence was a fragile shield, but beneath it, Emily sensed a quiet knowing, a perception too pure to be hidden forever. She didn't yet realize that Lily's small voice, still untested in the world of legal procedure, would soon pierce the courtroom silence and shift the case in ways no lawyer could predict. The second recess ended with the scrape of chairs and the low murmur of spectators resettling into their seats. Afternoon sunlight pooled across the polished oak floor as the bailiff called the courtroom back to order. Jason Howley rose first, smoothing the front of his charcoal suit and adjusting a silver tie clip that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. He looked every inch the composed father, a picture of poise and quiet dignity. But to those who knew the private side of Jason, that calm exterior carried a different weight, a performance honed over years of calculated charm. Judge Franklin Marks glanced over his reading glasses at the defense table. "Mr. Hall, your attorney may proceed," he said, his voice firm but neutral. Jason's lawyer, Richard Cole, stood with the confidence of a man used to commanding attention. A seasoned litigator from Philadelphia, Cole projected an air of easy authority as he stepped toward the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor," Cole began smoothly, "the picture presented by the plaintiff is one of fear and instability. But we are here to show that Jason Howley is not only a loving father, but a responsible, contributing member of society who wants nothing more than to be present in his daughter's life." He spoke in measured tones, his cadence carefully calculated to project sincerity. As he addressed the judge, he gestured occasionally toward Jason, whose posture remained impeccable. Jason sat with his hands folded neatly on the table, his eyes occasionally lifting to meet the judge's gaze in what seemed like quiet earnestness. Cole began by submitting a series of exhibits, photographs, financial statements, and witness testimonies. The first photograph flashed onto the courtroom's monitor, a vibrant image of Jason pushing Lily on a swing in a sunlit park. Her tiny arms were outstretched in delight, her mouth open in a giggle frozen in time. A second photo showed Jason reading a bedtime story, Lily perched on his lap with sleepy eyes and a small smile. Another depicted a weekend trip to the zoo, Jason crouched beside Lily as they pointed toward a giraffe. "These are not the actions of an absent father," Cole said, turning toward the judge. "These are the actions of a man committed to his child's happiness and development." A soft ripple of murmurs passed through the gallery. Several spectators tilted their heads toward the screen, expressions softening at the sight of the smiling toddler. Emily kept her eyes forward, her knuckles whitening against the table's edge. She recognized every photograph. She remembered the carefully orchestrated outings, the subtle pressure Jason applied to ensure they appeared at the right places with the right smiles at the right time. She also remembered the silent car rides home moments when the warmth of the photographs dissolved into icy tension. Cole continued, introducing a witness for the defense, a former co-worker of Jason's named Derek Hughes. Derek, a middle-aged man in a neatly pressed shirt, took the stand with a polite nod to the judge. Under Cole's guidance, he described Jason as a dedicated employee and an enthusiastic father who frequently spoke of his daughter with affection. "He's always talking about Lily," Derek testified. "He shows us pictures all the time. He's proud of her. Cole used Derek's words to build a narrative of stability and devotion. He highlighted Jason's steady job at a regional logistics firm, his timely child support payments, and his participation in parenting classes recommended by the court. Each fact layered upon the next like bricks in a carefully constructed wall. "Mr. Hawley," Cole said, turning to Jason, "would you please share with the court why maintaining a close relationship with your daughter is so important to you?" Jason stood, buttoning his jacket before stepping toward the witness stand. His movements were deliberate, his expression soft but resolute. After taking the oath, he settled into the chair and looked directly at Judge Marks. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and controlled, "Lily is my world. From the moment I first held her, I knew my life had changed. No matter what has happened between Emily and me, I've always wanted to be there for our daughter. I may not be perfect, no parent is, but I love her more than anything." His words carried a quiet conviction that resonated through the courtroom. A few spectators exchanged approving glances. Even the judge's pen paused briefly over his notepad. Jason's eyes glistened with what could have been emotion, or a performance sharpened by years of practice. Cole guided Jason through a series of questions designed to reinforce the image of a caring, dependable father. Jason spoke of bedtime routines, of the joy of teaching Lily to ride a tricycle, of the heartbreak of missed birthdays when Emily allegedly refused his visitation requests. Each answer was framed with careful humility. He admitted to communication challenges in the past, but emphasized his commitment to positive co-parenting. Emily sat motionless, though inside her thoughts raced. She recognized the subtle rewrites of history, moments of neglect transformed into noble sacrifices. Heated confrontations reframed as misunderstandings. Jason's narrative left no room for the late-night arguments, the sudden disappearances, the quiet intimidation that had once filled their home like smoke. During cross-examination, Marla Green rose, her sharp eyes locked on Jason. She began with a calm but deliberate tone, questioning the gaps in his visitation history and the discrepancies in his financial records. Jason maintained his composure, answering smoothly, occasionally offering a rueful smile. When pressed about specific incidents, unanswered calls during medical emergencies, missed child support payments despite documented income, he deflected with explanations polished to a sheen. "There were misunderstandings," he said, leaning slightly forward, his voice tinged with regret. "Emily and I were both under a lot of stress. But I've never, ever put Lily in harm's way." Marla narrowed her gaze. "Mr. Hawley, do you deny raising your voice in front of your daughter on multiple occasions?" Jason paused just long enough to appear thoughtful. "I may have raised my voice," he admitted, "but never in anger toward Lily. Sometimes parents disagree. I regret those moments, but they were never meant to frighten her." His words were perfectly balanced, an acknowledgement without true accountability. The judge scribbled notes, but offered no visible reaction. In the back row, Lily sat quietly with her caretaker, her small face turned toward the man on the witness stand. Her stuffed rabbit rested in her lap as she studied the proceedings with a seriousness beyond her years. When Jason spoke of love and devotion, her eyes followed his movements, unblinking. At times she tilted her head slightly, as though trying to match the man in the courtroom with the one she remembered at home. The afternoon wore on, each question and answer weaving a narrative of contested truths. Jason's testimony was a masterclass in controlled storytelling. He acknowledged just enough flaws to appear genuine, while redirecting blame with subtle grace. To the untrained ear, his words painted a portrait of a misunderstood father fighting only for the right to love his child. Emily felt the weight of perception pressing against her. She knew that in a courtroom, appearances could sway hearts as much as evidence. Jason's charm, the photographs, the glowing testimony of colleagues, all worked to erode the invisible walls she had built to protect Lily. Yet beneath her anxiety, A flicker of resolve remained. She had endured too much to be undone by carefully rehearsed words. As Jason stepped down from the witness stand, he cast a brief glance toward Emily. For a fleeting second, his polished expression faltered. There, beneath the smooth surface, Emily glimpsed the man she remembered, the flash of control, the silent claim. It was gone almost instantly, replaced by the practiced smile of a loving father. Judge Marks called for a short break, his gavel striking once against the bench. The courtroom buzzed with low conversation as spectators digested the testimony. Some seemed moved by Jason's declarations of love. Others exchanged skeptical looks. Reporters scribbled notes, aware that the case carried the kind of drama that captured headlines. Emily exhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders to relax. Across the room, Lily shifted in her seat, eyes still fixed on the man who had just spoken. The child's small brow furrowed, as if she sensed the tension that words alone could not convey. Emily caught her daughter's gaze and offered a faint, reassuring smile. The battle of appearances was far from over. Evidence would continue, arguments would sharpen, and the truth, whatever form it took, would have to find its way through layers of charm and performance. Yet Emily felt an undercurrent she couldn't quite name, a quiet certainty that something beyond legal strategy would shape the outcome. As the recess concluded and the courtroom prepared for the next round of testimony, the smallest person in the room remained the silent center of gravity. Lily's eyes followed her father as he returned to his seat, her tiny hands clutching the worn rabbit to her chest. No one yet realized that those same hands would soon gesture toward a truth more powerful than any attorney's closing argument, and that the words waiting behind her careful silence would carry a force the courtroom could neither predict nor contain. The courthouse air felt heavier as the hearing resumed after the brief recess, as though the walls themselves sensed the tension mounting with every passing minute. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, slanting across polished wooden benches and painting streaks of gold on the somber faces gathered inside. People had begun to lean forward in their seats, sensing that the case, already fraught with emotion, was heading toward an unpredictable turn. Emily Carter sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, her palms flat against the smooth grain of the wood. Across from her, Jason Hawley adjusted his tie with a faint smirk that never quite reached his eyes. He appeared composed, but the slight twitch of his jaw betrayed the strain beneath the surface. At the far end of the room, 2-year-old Lily sat on a bench between a court-appointed child advocate and Emily's close friend, Karen. The little girl clutched her beloved stuffed rabbit to her chest, the worn ears fraying from months of affection. Her tiny sneakers swung rhythmically above the floor, too short to reach the ground. Though Lily couldn't possibly grasp the legal complexities swirling around her, she seemed to feel the energy, a strange mixture of fear, anticipation, and quiet defiance that saturated the room. Her wide brown eyes darted from one adult to another, her small brow furrowing whenever voices grew sharp. The judge, a stern but fair woman named Margaret Dorsey, glanced in Lily's direction more than once as she shuffled her papers. Children were rarely present in custody hearings of this nature. Judge Dorsey had initially questioned whether allowing the toddler to remain inside was wise, but Emily's attorney had argued gently that Lily grew anxious when separated from her mother for too long. Against her better judgment, the judge had allowed the exception, though she maintained a careful watch. Something about the child's steady gaze unsettled even her seasoned heart. As the proceedings resumed, Jason's lawyer rose, his voice calm and polished. He began to question Emily about her employment, her income, her home environment, probing for any crack that could be exploited to portray her as unstable or unfit. Emily answered each query with quiet precision, though her fingers tightened on the edge of the table whenever Jason's name surfaced. Behind her composed facade, memories clawed at her mind, slammed doors, shouted threats, nights spent clutching Lily as Jason's temper flared. Each recollection threatened to unravel her, but she forced herself to remain steady. This was not the place for fear. This was the moment for resolve. From her bench, Lily watched intently. Each time Jason's voice filled the room, she flinched almost imperceptibly, her small shoulders stiffening. Karen noticed and gently rested a hand on the child's back, offering silent reassurance. The stuffed rabbit became Lily's shield, her tiny fingers kneading the worn fabric with increasing urgency. Though she had no words to articulate it, she recognized the tone of danger in her father's smooth, practiced speech. Something deep within her, some instinct untouched by reason, told her that the smiling man across the aisle was not safe. Jason, for his part, seemed to thrive under the spotlight. He spoke of bedtime stories, family picnics, and unfortunate misunderstandings blown out of proportion. Each anecdote was delivered with careful charm, punctuated by well-timed smiles toward the gallery. He painted himself as a loving father, wronged by a vindictive ex-partner. To the casual observer, his performance might have been convincing. Yet those who watched closely, Judge Dorsey among them, could sense the edges of a different truth. There was something too rehearsed in his gestures, too polished in his sorrow. Like a portrait painted to hide the cracks in the wall behind it, Jason's story gleamed with an unnatural shine. Emily's attorney seized on the subtle inconsistencies. He questioned Jason about past incidents, police reports of loud arguments, neighbors' complaints about late-night disturbances, a restraining order briefly filed and then withdrawn under pressure. Jason deflected smoothly, offering excuses that sounded plausible but never quite satisfied. Each answer left a residue of doubt that lingered in the air like the faint scent of smoke after a fire. During a pause in the questioning, a soft sound broke the tension, a small sniffle from Lily's bench. All eyes turned instinctively toward the child. Lily sat frozen, her rabbit clutched tightly, her wide eyes fixed on Jason. The room fell silent for a heartbeat too long. Jason's gaze flicked to his daughter, and for a split second, the mask slipped. A flash of something darker, impatience, irritation, perhaps even anger flickered across his face before he quickly composed himself. But the moment was not lost on the judge, nor on Emily, whose heart clenched with both fear and validation. Karen whispered soothingly to Lily, but the little girl remained tense, her gaze unwavering. It was as though some unspoken memory had surfaced in her mind, something she could not explain, but could not ignore. Her tiny body leaned slightly forward, as if drawn toward the center of the room where truth and deception wrestled for dominance. Judge Dorsey cleared her throat, bringing the court back to order. "Let's proceed," she said firmly, though her eyes lingered on Lily for a moment longer. The questioning resumed, but the energy in the courtroom had shifted. Jason's confidence, once so unshakable, seemed to falter under the weight of that innocent stare. His answers grew shorter, his polished charm losing its luster. Emily felt the change like a current running through the air. For the first time in months, she sensed that the tide might finally be turning. She looked at her daughter, who sat quietly, but with an expression far older than her years. Lily could not know the impact she was having, yet her presence alone seemed to unravel Jason's carefully constructed narrative. The hours stretched, each exchange of questions and answers layering tension upon tension. Outside, the late afternoon light deepened into a burnished gold, casting long shadows across the floor. Inside, the child remained a silent sentinel, her very existence a reminder of what was truly at stake. The adults spoke of custody, finances, and visitation rights, but Lily's wide, knowing eyes told a simpler story, one of safety versus danger, love versus fear. As the session drew to a close for the day, the judge announced another brief recess. Chairs creaked and papers shuffled, but few in the room could shake the lingering unease. The child had not spoken a single word, yet her quiet presence had become the gravitational center of the entire proceeding. Something was building, something no lawyer's argument or carefully prepared testimony could contain. Emily rose from her seat and approached Lily, crouching to meet her at eye level. "You're doing so well, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing a loose curl from the toddler's forehead. Lily blinked, her tiny lips pressing together as though holding back a thought too heavy to share. She reached out with one small hand, gripping her mother's sleeve with surprising strength. Emily felt the pressure, a silent plea she couldn't fully decipher. Across the room, Jason watched, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with something that looked dangerously close to fear. For the first time all day, his smooth exterior showed a hairline crack. He turned away quickly, pretending to study a document, but the damage was done. The judge had seen it. The attorneys had seen it. And though Lily could not articulate it, some part of her had sensed it too. The hearing would continue, with more questions, more arguments, more carefully constructed defenses. Yet everyone present understood that the balance had shifted. A child's silent awareness had spoken volumes, and the courtroom felt like a storm cloud waiting for the lightning strike. No one could have guessed how soon it would arrive, or how profoundly it would alter the course of the case. As the gavel signaled the close of the day's session, the spectators filed out in hushed conversation. They spoke not of legal strategies or witness testimony, but of the little girl with the stuffed rabbit and the eyes that seemed to see far more than her years allowed. Lily remained quiet as Emily gathered her belongings, but deep within her, something was beginning to stir, a need for truth that, before long, would find its way into words. The courthouse clock ticked steadily toward late afternoon as Judge Margaret Dorsey called for a 15-minute recess. The gavel's sharp rap echoed like a gunshot in the heavy air, breaking the tension, but not the unease that clung to every surface. Lawyers shuffled their papers and stretched their legs, but conversations were quiet, eyes wary. Something unspoken had begun to throb beneath the surface of the day's testimony, something that no stack of legal briefs could disguise. Emily Carter exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her shoulders ached from hours of keeping her posture perfectly upright, as though good posture alone could convey credibility. She gathered her notes slowly, buying herself a few precious seconds to steady her racing heart. Her friend Karen leaned close, whispering encouragement. "You're doing great," she murmured. "Stay strong." "He's slipping. I can see it." Emily nodded but said nothing. Her throat felt tight, her pulse a low, insistent drum. Across the aisle, Jason Holley moved with a practiced calm that seemed almost theatrical. He adjusted his cuffs, smoothed his tie, and offered a tight smile to his attorney. Yet anyone looking closely could spot the subtle signs of strain. The way his jaw tightened when no one addressed him, the quick glances he cast toward the bench, where little Lily sat with her stuffed rabbit. Jason's lawyer leaned in to confer, but Jason barely listened. His focus was locked on the child, who seemed to hold the room's attention without saying a word. Lily, meanwhile, remained on the wooden bench near the back, her tiny feet swinging above the floor. She hugged the rabbit against her chest, small fingers kneading the worn fabric until tufts of stuffing peeked through. The child advocate seated beside her offered a juice box, but Lily shook her head silently, eyes trained on the man across the aisle. Though she was only 2 years old, something deep inside her registered the danger masked behind Jason's polite smile. She could not articulate why her heart sped up when he moved closer, but her body remembered what her words could not. The courtroom door creaked as spectators stretched their legs in the hallway. A low murmur of conversation floated in from the corridor. Clerks discussing paperwork, reporters speculating on the hearing's outcome. The normal sounds of a courthouse at recess might have been comforting on another day. But inside this room, an invisible thread of tension connected every person who remained. It stretched between Emily's protective stance the judge's observant gaze, Jason's calculated movements, and the small, silent figure of Lily. Jason stood and began to cross the room, his polished shoes clicking softly against the wood floor. Each step seemed louder than it should, drawing the eyes of those who lingered. Emily stiffened immediately, her muscles tensing like a drawn bow. Karen caught her arm. "He's not allowed," she began, but her voice trailed off as Jason slowed near the bench where Lily sat. "Hi, sweetheart," Jason said softly, crouching to meet his daughter's eye level. His voice carried the warmth of a practiced bedtime story, but there was a sharpness beneath it, a tension coiled like a hidden spring. "Daddy just wanted to say hello." He reached out a hand, palm up, an invitation wrapped in a smile. Lily froze. Her wide brown eyes flicked to the outstretched hand, and then back to Jason's face. Her little fingers tightened around the rabbit until her knuckles blanched. She made no move to return the gesture. Instead, she pressed herself slightly closer to Karen, who instinctively shifted to block Jason's reach. "She's fine where she is," Karen said evenly, her voice calm but firm. Jason's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he straightened, masking the slip with a chuckle. "Of course," he said lightly. "Just wanted her to know Daddy's here." He turned to leave, but not before Lily whispered something too faint for anyone, but Karen to hear a tiny, almost inaudible whimper that sounded like no. Karen's heart tightened. She wrapped an arm protectively around the child and shot a warning glance at the bailiff, who had already begun to move closer. The bailiff, a broad-shouldered man named Officer Grant, approached with quiet authority. "Sir," he said to Jason, his tone polite but edged with steel, "you'll need to return to your table." Jason raised his hands in a show of compliance, flashing a grin that failed to reach his eyes. "Of course, officer," he replied smoothly. Yet as he walked back to his seat, he shot a look toward Emily, a brief, sharp glance that carried more menace than any shouted threat. Emily felt that looked like a physical shove. Memories flooded back. Nights when Jason's voice rose behind closed doors, when Lily's cries pierced the thin walls of their apartment, when the fear of what he might do next kept Emily awake until dawn. She clenched her jaw and forced herself to breathe. This was a courtroom. She was safe here. At least, she told herself, safer than she had been before. Judge Dorsey returned a few minutes later, her robe rustling as she took her seat behind the elevated bench. Though the recess had officially ended, her eyes lingered on Jason as she surveyed the room. Something in her gaze suggested that she had noticed the subtle power dynamics playing out during the break. Without addressing the incident directly, she tapped her gavel lightly and called the court back to order. The sound rang sharp and final, like a warning. As the attorneys prepared to resume questioning, the atmosphere shifted. Jason's earlier confidence now carried an undercurrent of frustration. His shoulders stiffened as he answered routine procedural questions, his charm slightly frayed at the edges. Emily's attorney seized the opportunity, probing more firmly into Jason's past behavior. He introduced a series of reports neighbors who had filed noise complaints, a pediatrician's note documenting Lily's anxiety during visits, a text message exchange that hinted at veiled threats. Jason deflected, but each denial sounded a shade too practiced. Through it all, Lily remained unusually still. Her big eyes followed every word, every gesture. Though she could not understand the legal vocabulary, she sensed the stakes. Each time Jason raised his voice, even slightly, she clutched the rabbit tighter and inched closer to Karen. The child advocate noticed and quietly took notes, her pen scratching softly across the page. Later, those observations would prove critical. The gallery of onlookers leaned forward, captivated by the silent drama unfolding between father and daughter. It was more than a custody dispute now. It was a contest between a carefully curated image and a child's unspoken truth. The tension was so thick that even the creak of a wooden bench sounded startling. Then, in a brief lull between questions, Lily did something unexpected. She shifted on the bench and sat upright, her small body turning to face the center of the room. Her rabbit dangled from one hand, forgotten for the moment. She stared directly at Jason, with a look that was startlingly intense for a toddler, a look of pure, wordless recognition. Jason faltered mid-answer, his confident rhythm breaking as his eyes met hers. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to hold its breath. Emily felt the shift deep in her chest. Something was coming. She could sense it like the heavy air before a summer storm. The attorneys continued their careful dance of questions and objections, but everyone present, judge, lawyers, spectators, felt the same thing. The balance of power had begun to tilt, and it was not tilting in Jason's favor. The judge eventually called for another brief pause to allow documents to be exchanged. Papers rustled and chairs scraped against the floor, but no one truly relaxed. All eyes kept drifting toward the small child with the stuffed rabbit and the unwavering gaze. Lily had not spoken a single word, yet her presence had reshaped the room. It was as if the truth itself sat there in miniature, waiting for the right moment to be heard. Emily reached for a cup of water, her hand trembling slightly. She looked at her daughter and caught a flicker of something both terrifying and hopeful in those wide brown eyes. Whatever came next, she knew that this little girl, her quiet, brave Lily, was stronger than anyone had ever imagined. The courtroom had fallen into an uneasy rhythm, questions asked and answered, objections raised and sustained, paper shuffling like dry leaves in a restless wind. Yet beneath the procedural exchanges, something far more primal simmered. The energy inside the chamber felt electric, as if every person present sensed that the next few moments would change everything. Emily Carter sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, her shoulders squared, though her hands trembled beneath the surface. Across the aisle, Jason Hale's composure remained mostly intact, but the strain around his eyes betrayed the effort it took to maintain his carefully polished mask. Lily sat on the wooden bench, between her mother's friend Karen and the child advocate, her stuffed rabbit cradled in her lap. The 2-year-old had remained uncharacteristically still for the past hour, her wide eyes fixed on the space between her parents. Though she couldn't fully understand the legal dance unfolding before her, she sensed the stakes with the keen awareness only a child's heart can carry. Every rise and fall of Jason's voice made her flinch. Every pause in the proceedings tightened her grip on the rabbit's fraying ears. The adults traded words like chess pieces, but Lily felt the weight of something far heavier, a truth waiting to burst. Judge Margaret Dorsey adjusted her glasses and signaled for Jason's attorney to continue. Mr. Ha, the lawyer said smoothly, let's return to the evening of May 12th. Could you describe your interaction with Miss Carter that night? Jason leaned forward, his voice steady and confident. He painted a picture of a minor disagreement exaggerated by stress, describing himself as a patient father unfairly maligned. His tone was carefully measured, each word chosen to reinforce his narrative of calm reason. He smiled faintly at the judge, as though inviting her to share in the absurdity of the accusations against him. Emily sat motionless, jaw tight, her eyes fixed on the table before her. Inside, memories of that night clawed at her chest. The slammed doors, the shouted threats, the way Jason's anger filled every corner of their small apartment until breathing felt impossible. She could still hear Lily's frightened cries, feel the trembling of her daughter's tiny body against her own as she whispered reassurances neither of them fully believed. Emily forced the memories down, focusing instead on her attorney's notes. This was not the moment to lose composure. As Jason continued his testimony, Lily began to fidget. At first, it was a small shift of her legs, a faint rustle of her shoes against the wooden bench. Then she leaned forward, eyes narrowing on her father with startling intensity. Karen noticed the change and gently rested a hand on the child's back. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, but Lily barely seemed to hear. Her tiny shoulders rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. The rabbit slipped slightly from her grasp, dangling by one ear. Jason paused mid-sentence, catching the movement in his peripheral vision. For a fleeting moment, his polished facade cracked. He looked directly at Lily, and something sharp flickered in his eyes, an impatience, perhaps even fear. Lily froze, her gaze locked on his. The room seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with a tension so palpable that even the seasoned bailiff straightened instinctively. Then, in a voice small but impossibly clear, Lily spoke. "Bad man." 2 simple words, no louder than a whisper, but they sliced through the courtroom like a blade. The soft scrape of a chair leg, the quiet shuffle of papers, every sound ceased in an instant. Conversations died mid-breath. It was as if the world itself had stopped to listen. Gasps rippled across the gallery. A reporter seated near the back lowered his pen in stunned silence. Karen's eyes widened as she instinctively pulled Lily closer, though the child showed no sign of fear, only a fierce, unwavering resolve. Emily's breath caught in her throat. For a split second, she thought she might have imagined it, but the echo of those 2 words hung in the air, undeniable. Jason's reaction was immediate, though not as controlled as he might have wished. His body stiffened, shoulders jerking slightly as if struck. A flicker of panic crossed his face before he forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Your Honor," he began, his voice a shade too loud. "She's just a child, she doesn't know what she's saying." But Judge Dorsey held up a hand, silencing him with a single sharp gesture. Her eyes, usually cool and measured, now burned with quiet intensity. She turned her gaze to the child, then back to Jason. "Mr. Halley," she said evenly, "you will remain silent until addressed." The bailiff stepped forward almost imperceptibly, his broad frame a silent warning. Jason opened his mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it, sinking back into his chair with a stiff, reluctant nod. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Jason barely seemed to hear. Emily's attorney seized the moment with cautious precision. Rising slowly, he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, while we understand that the testimony of a child this young is not formally admissible, the spontaneity of this statement speaks volumes about the child's sense of safety." His words were measured, but his eyes betrayed a spark of triumph. This was the unfiltered truth that no cross-examination could dismantle. The gallery remained silent, every spectator acutely aware of the gravity of what had just occurred. Lily sat quietly, as if her declaration had released a weight she could not name. She leaned against Karen's side, her small body finally relaxing for the first time all day. The stuffed rabbit slipped completely from her grasp and landed softly on the bench beside her. Judge Dorsey leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Miss Lily," she said, choosing her words carefully, "would you like to stay with your mommy?" Lily nodded once, a tiny motion that carried the force of a sworn affidavit. Another wave of hushed murmurs swept through the courtroom. Jason's lawyer sprang to his feet, objecting loudly. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. A toddler's statements cannot—" "Sit down," Judge Dorsey interrupted, her gavel striking the wood with a sharp crack. The sound reverberated through the chamber like thunder. "I am fully aware of the legal standards. I am also aware of my obligation to ensure the welfare of this child." Jason's face tightened, the charm draining away like water through a sieve. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering harshly, but the words were lost in the courtroom's charged silence. For the first time, the polished mask he had worn all day showed deep, unmistakable cracks. Emily sat frozen, tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to scoop her daughter into her arms, to whisper words of comfort and gratitude, but she forced herself to remain composed. The case was not over, and she knew any display of emotion might be misinterpreted. Still, a tremor of hope flickered in her chest, a fragile light after years of darkness. Judge called for a brief recess to consult privately with the child advocate. As the courtroom began to stir, conversations breaking out in cautious whispers, Jason remained seated, staring straight ahead. His hands clenched into fists on the table, knuckles white against the polished wood. Whatever confidence he had carried into the day had been shattered by two tiny words. Emily rose slowly, her attorney placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Corinne gathered Lily into her arms, the little girl nestling against her with a weary sigh. Emily crossed the room and gently took her daughter, holding her close for the first time since the hearing began. Lily rested her head on her mother's shoulder, her small body warm and reassuring. Emily pressed a soft kiss to her hair, whispering a silent promise. "You're safe now." Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail of the extraordinary scene. Spectators exchanged wide-eyed glances, their earlier curiosity replaced by a dawning recognition of the stakes. This was no longer just a custody hearing. It was a revelation, a moment of pure, undeniable truth that had pierced the careful layers of legal argument. When Judge Dorsey returned to the bench, the room fell instantly silent. Her expression remained neutral, but the weight of Lily's words lingered in the air like a bell that could not be unrung. She looked first at Emily, then at Jason, and finally at the child who had spoken the simplest, most powerful testimony imaginable. 2 words soft, unplanned, and devastating had changed everything. The courtroom felt different when Judge Dorsey returned from our private consultation with the child advocate. The air itself seemed heavier, as if those 2 tiny words, "bad man," had shifted the very gravity of the room. Reporters leaned forward with sharpened pencils and hungry eyes. Lawyers adjusted their ties and papers, pretending to maintain composure. But everyone present knew that something irreversible had happened. The hearing was no longer a simple custody battle. It had become a crucible for truth, and the smallest voice in the room had set the fire. Emily Carter sat rigidly at her table, Lily nestled against her shoulder. Her attorney whispered instructions in a low, even tone, but Emily barely heard him. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the way Lily had stood, the clarity in her little voice, the echo of those 2 words ricocheting off the courtroom walls. Emily's heart swelled with equal parts pride and sorrow. No mother wanted her child to carry memories dark enough to produce such certainty. Yet those words might finally keep them safe. Across the aisle, Jason Hale's mask of confidence had cracked beyond repair. His lawyer leaned in, speaking urgently, but Jason's responses were clipped and distracted. He sat back stiffly, eyes fixed on the judge's bench, his jaw tight enough to whiten his knuckles where they gripped the table's edge. Gone was the easy charm he had wielded earlier like a weapon. In its place lay a cold, simmering frustration, a man realizing the narrative he had so carefully built was unraveling thread by thread. The bailiff called the room to order as Judge Dorsey settled into her seat. Her gaze swept across the courtroom, pausing briefly on Lily. The judge's expression remained neutral, but there was a softness in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of the courage it took for such a small child to speak. When she finally addressed the court, her voice was firm, but tinged with a gravity that commanded respect. "This court recognizes," she began, "that statements from a child of this age cannot be treated as formal testimony. However, we cannot ignore the spontaneous nature of what was said or the clear emotional context in which it was delivered. The welfare of the child remains our highest priority." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Jason's lawyer immediately rose, objecting with well-rehearsed legalese about due process and the unreliability of Toddler's speech. His tone was crisp, but the desperation beneath it betrayed him. Your Honor, while we respect the court's concern, we must emphasize that a 2-year-old's utterance, without cross-examination, cannot be given evidentiary weight. Judge Dorsey raised a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. Counselor, I am well aware of the evidentiary standards, she said sharply. This is not about evidence in the traditional sense. This is about assessing the best interests of a child. The lawyer swallowed his next argument and sat down, his cheeks flushing under the scrutiny. Jason shot him a dark look, then turned his glare toward Emily. The intensity of it made her stomach tighten, but she refused to look away. For the first time in years, she met his eyes without flinching. The silent battle between them was brief, but searing now. Mother's defiance against a man who had once controlled every corner of her life. Judge invited the child advocate to present her preliminary observations. The advocate, a calm woman named Marissa Blake, stood with her clipboard in hand. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. In my professional opinion, the child's spontaneous statement, combined with her physical reactions during today's proceedings, indicates a significant level of fear toward her father. While children can be unpredictable, this was not a random outburst. It was a moment of emotional clarity. Jason's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. The gallery leaned in as Marissa continued, describing Lily's subtle flinches when Jason spoke, her persistent need to clutch her stuffed rabbit, and the quiet way she had observed every exchange. Her behavior is consistent, Marissa concluded, with a child who associates one parent with safety and the other with threat. Emily blinked back tears as Marissa spoke. Each observation confirmed what she had long feared and long struggled to prove. The legal system often demanded documentation, evidence, witnesses. Yet here, in this unexpected moment, the truth had emerged through a child's pure instinct. Jason's lawyer attempted a final counter, calling for a psychological evaluation and arguing that Emily had coached Lily to say those words. Children are highly impressionable, he insisted. It's entirely possible that Miss Carter, consciously or unconsciously, influenced the child's statement. Emily's attorney stood immediately, his tone sharp but controlled. Your Honor, there is no evidence of coaching. In fact, the statement was made without prompting, in the middle of Mr. Hale's own testimony. To suggest manipulation is not only unfounded, but insulting to the intelligence of this court. All eyes turned to Judge Dorsey, who sat in thoughtful silence for a long moment. The tension in the room was nearly unbearable. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the judge spoke. I will not permit baseless speculation. The timing and context of the child's statements speak for themselves. Jason exhaled sharply, a sound that landed somewhere between a sigh and a growl. His shoulders tensed as he leaned toward his attorney, whispering something through clenched teeth. The lawyer nodded stiffly, but offered no further objections. The tide had turned, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, Lily remained a quiet center of gravity amid the storm. She nestled against Emily's chest, her small fingers absently tracing the rabbit's worn ear. Though the room buzzed with legal debate, she seemed almost serene, as if releasing those 2 words had lifted a weight too heavy for her tiny shoulders. Her calm presence only deepened the impact of what she had said. No one could look at her without feeling the truth she carried. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail of the extraordinary scene. Some exchanged quick glances, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and discomfort. They were witnessing something rare, the raw power of innocence cutting through layers of legal jargon and adult pretense. Judge Dorsey called for closing statements. Emily's attorney spoke first, his voice measured but resonant. He reminded the court of Jason's history, police reports of late-night disturbances, neighbors' complaints of shouting, Emily's previous but withdrawn restraining order. Your Honor, he concluded, the law asks you to consider the best interests of the child. Today, the child herself told us where those interests lie. Jason's lawyer followed with a strained rebuttal, repeating arguments about parental rights and the dangers of emotional overreach. But his words sounded hollow, the weight of Lily's declaration rendering every legal technicality meaningless. Finally, Judge Dorsey addressed the room. "This court is not blind to the emotional complexity of this case," she said. "However, we cannot ignore what we have witnessed today. The child's spontaneous statement, corroborated by professional observation and a documented history of conflict, compels this court to act decisively." A hush fell so complete that the distant hum of an air vent became audible. Jason sat rigid, his face pale beneath the courtroom lights. Emily held Lily tighter, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She dared not breathe as the judge continued. "Pending a final written order," Judge Dorsey said, her tone unwavering. "Full physical and legal custody of the child. Lily Carter is awarded to her mother, Emily Carter. Mr. Hawley will be granted supervised visitation only, contingent upon further evaluation by a family counselor." The words landed like a gavel before the actual gavel struck. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Karen squeezed Emily's arm, her eyes shining with relief. Emily's attorney exhaled softly, a subtle release of tension after hours of quiet vigilance. Jason's lawyer rose to protest, but Jason himself remained seated, motionless. His eyes locked on Emily, a storm of anger and disbelief swirling just beneath the surface. For a heartbeat, Emily felt the familiar chill of fear. But this time, something inside her pushed back. She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. He no longer held power here. The law, at last, was on her side. The bailiff stepped forward, signaling the formal end of the session. Papers rustled, chairs scraped, and the gallery began to buzz with subdued conversation. Reporters hurried toward the hallway, already drafting headlines about the toddler whose 2 words changed a courtroom. Emily rose slowly, balancing Lily on her hip. The little girl rested her head on her mother's shoulder, her small body warm and solid. Emily pressed a gentle kiss to her daughter's hair, whispering a promise only Lily could hear. "We're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you again." As they stepped toward the exit, spectators parted to let them pass. Some offered quiet smiles of encouragement. Others simply watched in awe. They all knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, the moment when a child's innocent voice pierced through adult deception and spoke a truth no judge could ignore. Behind them, Jason remained seated, his attorney speaking in low, urgent tones. But the words no longer mattered. The verdict had been spoken not just by the judge, but by the smallest witness in the room. And though the legal process would continue with paperwork and formalities, the heart of the case had already been decided. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, spilling a warm glow over the courthouse steps as Emily Carter stepped into the crisp autumn air. The heavy wooden doors closed behind her with a finality that felt almost symbolic, as though sealing away years of fear and uncertainty. For the first time in a long time, Emily could breathe without the tightness in her chest. Lily nestled sleepily against her shoulder, her tiny fingers gripping the ear of her stuffed rabbit. The child's eyes fluttered half open, unbothered by the flurry of reporters gathering at the foot of the steps. Double quotes, "Miss Carter, can we have a statement?" One journalist called out, his microphone thrust forward as cameras clicked in rapid succession. Emily hesitated, clutching Lily closer. Her lawyer, Michael, stepped forward protectively. "No statements today," he said firmly. "Please respect the privacy of mother and child." The reporters persisted, their questions tumbling over one another. "How did you feel when Lily spoke? Do you believe justice was served? What's next for you and your daughter?" Emily kept her eyes forward, resisting the temptation to answer. This wasn't about sound bites or headlines. Today was about reclaiming the quiet safety she and Lily had been denied for so long. She offered a polite, but tight-lipped smile and followed Michael and her best friend, Karen, down the courthouse steps. As they reached the sidewalk, Karen placed a reassuring hand on Emily's back. "You did it?" she whispered, her voice trembling with both relief and pride. "You both did it." Emily exhaled a shaky breath. "She did it," she corrected softly, glancing down at the child in her arms. Those two little words. I'll never forget them. The small group slipped into a waiting car, leaving the media frenzy behind. As the vehicle pulled away, Emily looked back once. Through the courthouse's glass doors, she glimpsed Jason Hawley standing rigid in the lobby, his lawyer speaking to him in urgent tones. Jason's face was pale and unreadable, but the set of his jaw carried an unmistakable tension. Emily felt a familiar chill run through her, but it faded quickly. The judge's order was clear, and the system now stood between Jason and their daughter. He could no longer wield his temper or manipulation unchecked. The ride home was quiet, except for the soft hum of traffic. Lily stirred, her small voice breaking the silence. "Mommy," she murmured, still half asleep. "Yes, baby?" Emily said, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "We go home now?" Emily smiled through the sting of tears. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going home." Our home, the word home, carried a weight it hadn't before. Their small apartment once, just a temporary refuge now, felt like a sanctuary, a place where Emily could finally allow herself to believe in permanence and peace. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. The apartment was quiet, except for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. She stared at the legal papers spread before her, the official custody order bearing the judge's signature. It was more than a document. It was a shield. But even as relief washed over her, a lingering unease tugged at the edges of her thoughts. She knew Jason well enough to understand that he wouldn't fade away quietly. Michael's earlier words echoed in her mind. Supervised visitation is a safeguard, not a permanent wall. Stay vigilant. She intended to do just that. Her lawyer had already arranged for follow-up evaluations and counseling sessions to ensure that any future interactions would remain under watchful eyes. Emily also planned to enroll Lily in play therapy, not because she believed her daughter was broken, but to help her process the storm she had so bravely weathered. Across town, Jason sat alone in his dimly lit apartment. Empty bottles cluttered the coffee table as he replayed the day's events in his head. Rage pulsed beneath his skin, but so did something unexpected: fear. For years, he had controlled the narrative, confident in his ability to charm judges, intimidate Emily, and manipulate anyone who questioned him. But the unfiltered truth of a toddler's voice had cut through every strategy, leaving him exposed. His lawyer's warnings about supervised visits and mandatory counseling played like static in the background. For the first time, Jason felt the uncomfortable weight of losing control. The media storm that followed the case was swift and unrelenting. By morning, headlines splashed across news sites. 2-year-old's words sway custody ruling. Toddler speaks truth in courtroom showdown. Talk shows debated the case, with experts weighing in on the psychological significance of a child's spontaneous statement. Some questioned the legal implications, while others hailed it as a victory for children's rights. Emily avoided the coverage as best she could, focusing instead on small, grounding tasks: making Lily's favorite blueberry pancakes, sorting laundry, watering the potted plants on the WINDOWSILL. But even as the outside world buzzed with fascination, Emily's inner world began to heal in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. She noticed it in the way Lily slept more soundly, no longer waking with night terrors. She felt it in her own breathing, deeper and steadier than it had been in years. Each morning brought small victories, the freedom to plan their day without fear of unexpected knocks on the door. The simple joy of hearing Lily's giggle echo through the apartment, without a shadow of dread lurking behind it. Karen remained a steady presence, visiting often to help with errands and share quiet conversations over cups of coffee. One evening, as they watched Lily build a tower of colorful blocks, Karen turned to Emily with a thoughtful look. "You know," she said softly, "you showed more strength than most people could ever imagine. But that little girl, she's something else. I've never seen courage like that." Emily smiled, her eyes following her daughter's small, determined hands. "She's stronger than I'll ever be," she admitted. "And she doesn't even know it." Weeks later, the first supervised visitation was scheduled at a neutral family center. Emily's stomach tightened as she prepared, double-checking Lily's bag and rehearsing calming words for her daughter. Though the visit would be monitored by trained professionals, the thought of Jason in the same room still stirred old anxieties. When they arrived, the center staff greeted them warmly, guiding them to a cheerful playroom filled with toys and bright murals. Lily clung to Emily at first, her wide eyes scanning the room. When Jason entered, escorted by a counselor, Lily stiffened and buried her face in Emily's shoulder. "Hi, Lily," Jason said, his voice forced into a strained cheerfulness. Lily peeked out briefly, her small hand gripping Emily's shirt. She said nothing. Instead, she turned her head and whispered to her mother, just loud enough for the counselor to hear, "Stay with Mommy." Emily met Jason's eyes across the room. This time, there was no fear, only resolve. The counselor noted the interaction carefully, her pen scratching across the clipboard. The visit proceeded under watchful eyes, every movement documented. Jason tried to engage Lily with toys and soft words, but the connection he once assumed was his by right was no longer automatic. Trust, once broken, could not be demanded. It had to be earned, if it could be earned at all. As winter turned to spring, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Emily enrolled Lily in a preschool where teachers praised the child's bright curiosity and gentle nature. Therapy sessions helped Lily express her feelings through art and play, revealing a resilience far beyond her years. Emily, too, found strength in counseling, shedding layers of guilt and fear she hadn't even realized she carried. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Emily and Lily visited a nearby park. The cherry blossoms were in bloom, scattering pale pink petals across the grass. Lily ran ahead, her laughter ringing through the crisp air. Emily watched her daughter twirl beneath the falling petals, the sunlight catching her golden hair, and felt a deep, grounding peace. Karen joined them, carrying a picnic basket. "You look lighter," she observed, settling onto the blanket. "I feel lighter," Emily replied with a soft smile. "It's like, for the first time, I can imagine a future that isn't defined by fear." They sat together, watching Lily chase a butterfly. For Emily, the journey wasn't over. There would be hearings to attend, forms to sign, boundaries to enforce. But the hardest part was behind them. A tiny voice had broken through years of silence, and in doing so, had given them both the gift of freedom. That evening, as Emily tucked Lily into bed, the little girl reached out and placed a hand on her mother's cheek. "Mommy," she whispered, her eyes wide and solemn. "I love you." Emily's heart swelled. "I love you more," she replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. Lily snuggled into her pillow, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "We're safe now," she murmured, echoing words Emily had once whispered in the courthouse hallway. Emily turned off the light, her chest tightening with gratitude. Those two simple words spoken weeks ago by a toddler, barely old enough to form full sentences, had not only swayed a judge, but changed the course of their lives. And as the apartment settled into peaceful silence, Emily knew that Lily's small voice had carried the greatest truth of all. Sometimes, the purest courage comes from the smallest hearts.